Hello, I'm Adrien Cuellar-McGuire, and I'm here today with Jed Morse, who is the Acting Chief Curator of the Nasher Sculpture Garden in downtown Dallas. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
This is a fabulous place. Again, we're in a building that is just a great example of architecture, and it houses a wonderful art collection as well, and that is the collection that belonged to Raymond and Patsy Nasher. And perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the building and then the collection.
Sure. Well, the building, since it was designed to house the Raymond and Patsy Nasher collection of modern and contemporary sculpture, was really built as an ideal place for viewing modern and contemporary sculpture. So you can see, even as we stand here, that there is quite a bit of natural light in the galleries.
Yes, it's nice.
Much more than you would normally find at other museums. And that's because sculpture can not only stand up to that kind of exposure to light, but in many instances really benefits from it. That this kind of all-over natural lighting effect brings out the natural modeling in the sculptures, so you can see the details and read the sculptures much more clearly. The building was designed by Italian architect Renzo Piano, who won the Pritzker Prize for Architecture in 1997. And he had designed a number of other small museums around the world. The Menil Collection in Houston, Texas. He also designed a museum for the Byler Foundation Collection in Basel, Switzerland. And in all of these museums, the thing that set him apart from a lot of other architects was how sensitive he was to the material that they contained. He was the buildings are very gracious places to view works of art. And that was what attracted Mr. Nasher to Renzo Piano in the first place. When you stand in the galleries of the Nasher Sculpture Center, you get a sense of how that works. Sculpture is a different kind of art. It's different from painting. Painting is a little bit easier to deal with at times. Sculpture is physical. It's big often, very weighty at times. It takes up space. It's three-dimensional. You have to be able to move all the way around it. And Renzo understood that going into the project, and he understood that the Nasher Sculpture Center would be about sculpture. And so when you stand in the galleries, you get a sense of the spaciousness, and that each work of art is given enough room to breathe, and that you can really walk around the work of art and experience it the way it's meant to be experienced. Raymond and Patsy Nasher had been collecting for over 40 years. And in fact, when they began collecting, they didn't start off collecting Picassos and Matisses and Giacomettis. They began collecting much more modestly, and in fact collected modern American prints, some paintings, some pre-Columbian ancient Mexican artifacts. And it wasn't until their business success led them to be able to start collecting in modern and contemporary sculpture. But once they did, they really found something that made sense for them. Because Mr. Nasher was a real estate developer and dealt with building buildings, he had a sense for space and how sculpture enhances space. One of the first major projects that he did was to build North Park Shopping Center in North Dallas in the mid-1960s. And that project allowed him to combine his passion for commerce with his passion for art. In fact, since they opened North Park in the 1960s, they've always shown works from their collection there. So as you walk from Neiman's to Dillard's, there are works by Jonathan Borofsky and Frank Stella and Andy Warhol and Antony Gormley. And these works are there to be enjoyed by everyone. It's interesting to note that Mr. Nasher knew that some of the works wouldn't be loved by everyone, but that didn't matter. It was just that they were exposed to it. And so really, the creation of the Nasher Sculpture Center is kind of the culmination of that ideal of being able to share their collection with as many people as possible. One of the unique features of the Nasher Sculpture Center is the transparency of the building. Glass facade all along the front and all along the back, so that you can actually stand on Flora Street, which is the main artery of the Arts District, look all the way through our galleries to the back of the garden beyond. And what this allows us to do is not only create relationships between works on display indoors with works on display outdoors, but it also gives this kind of seamless connection between the vibrancy of the urban environment, the city outside, and then the kind of calm repose of the galleries inside and the garden beyond. There's this kind of constant connection. And it was interesting, when Renzo Piano first took on this commission, he thought it was a bit daunting to create a sculpture garden in the middle of a downtown environment, because just behind our garden runs Woodall Rogers Expressway, where 500,000 cars run by every day.
Right.
And that doesn't make for a very calm setting, which you normally think of when you think of a sculpture garden, kind of an oasis away from all of the busyness of the city. Well, here, this is right in the middle of the city. There's lots of activity going on around us, and rather than trying to shut that out, Renzo embraced a design that would bring all of that in, that would open up the Sculpture Center to its urban environment. And thus we have this incredible glass facade and that wonderful transparency, which you also will see on the cross-axis of the building through the site, and picture windows that punctuate the wall of the garden to allow views in and also maintain that connection with the city outside. That transparency also allows us to create dialogues with works on display indoors and works on display outdoors. In fact, we are able to make connections between works of art of very different scales, connections that we wouldn't normally be able to make if we were closed off, if the interior galleries were closed to the outside. Works like this carved marble sculpture by Henri Gautier-Breschke, the hieratic head of Ezra Pound, a portrait, kind of this vorticist cubist portrait of Ezra Pound, can be seen in relation to much larger, more contemporary works of art that took inspiration from Gautier-Breschke's emphasis on the primitive and the distillation of those facial features, the sculptural forms, to very geometric simplicity. Modern-day constructivism in the work of Marc de Souvreau, which you see outdoors in this abstract rusted steel sculpture made of I-beams, construction equipment, that is so powerful but at the same time it has this lightness to it, perched on those three legs as if it's about to take off into the sky. The relationship between these two things is something that we can trace throughout the collection, from the very beginnings of the 20th century all the way through Russian constructivism, welded steel construction in the middle of the century, to the present day in work by Marc de Souvreau. This is an important sculpture in the Nasher collection for a number of reasons. It's a work by Auguste Rodin called The Age of Bronze, from about 1875. And it marks the beginning of the chronology not only of the Nasher collection, but also of modern sculpture in general. A lot of scholars point to this work as the beginnings of modern sculpture. And it was also a landmark in Rodin's career. This was the first major sculpture that he attempted. Up until this point, he had been working as an apprentice to other more commercially prominent sculptors. And it was with this work that he was trying to make a name for himself, his first full-scale figural sculpture that he produced. And he worked on it for a number of months. Had a Belgian soldier named Auguste Nate who posed for him. And in fact, when he presented this sculpture, when Rodin presented the sculpture to the Academy for consideration, there are some critics who rejected it because it was so lifelike. that they, in fact, accused Rodin of actually taking a mold of the model's body rather than sculpting it by hand. And of course, to any artist, any sculptor who considered himself an artist to be creating from his own imagination, this was a huge slap in the face. And he actually went to the trouble of bringing the model back into the studio and photographing him from every different angle, and then turning those photographs over to the Academy so that they could see this isn't a copy of someone's body, this is actually an artistic interpretation of it. But it was also troubling for the critics at the time because it pushed away a lot of the normal boundaries that were acceptable in sculpture at the time. Most works of art, particularly sculpture, were bound to certain literary or historical narratives. And this sculpture was difficult for people to understand because it was simply a nude, without any reference to a historical event or some kind of literary narrative. And in fact, that was indeed a very radical step and what actually marks the beginnings of modern sculpture. When Rodin started this sculpture, he initially intended to title it The Vanquished. And when you look at the sculpture, you can see that it looks like his left hand is meant to be holding something. And in fact, when Rodin was working with the model, he had the model holding a spear in that hand, and he had a laurel wreath around his head as well. The Vanquished was supposed to refer to the fallen French soldiers in the Franco-Prussian War. Ultimately, Rodin decided that the laurel wreath and the spear obscured the profiles of the sculpture. And so he removed them, and he was just left with a nude, which, of course, made it very difficult to understand why this would be called The Vanquished. There are no attributes. The spear is gone, the laurel is gone, you just have a standing nude. And so people were confused. That's when he changed the title to The Age of Bronze, making an oblique reference to what Rodin called an age in which man was physically perfect, but just starting to awaken to his potential.
Jed, I know that lighting is always a huge issue with museums. Would you tell us a little bit about the way that the museum was designed to allow natural light in and yet not too much?
Sure. Okay. Renzo Piano has been an innovator in terms of how to integrate natural light into a gallery environment. Since his days of designing the Pompidou in Paris, through the Menil and the Cy Twombly Gallery in Houston, all the way up to the Nasher Sculpture Center. And at each site he has refined the mechanisms with which he does that. The Nasher Sculpture Center, he actually came up with the simplest solution to this problem. In fact, if you look up, you can see that the ceiling is glass, and above that are a series of cast aluminum panels that regulate the flow of the sunlight into the galleries. And in fact, you see it kind of looks like an egg crate, where you have a bump on the top and a bump on the bottom that hold the egg in place. Well, imagine that and cutting a hole in the front of the one on the top and a hole in the back of the one on the bottom. And essentially that's what you have with the sunscreen. All of those holes only face north. They face due north. So they block out any direct sunlight from the east or west and only allow in that indirect light from the north. That light then comes into that chamber and is diffused throughout the gallery. So we get this very even lighting practically in any kind of weather condition. If it's cloudy outside, it doesn't matter. If it's sunny, if it's very sunny, it doesn't matter. It's always a kind of a constant, even overall light.
That's kind of an interesting development from the work that he did, of course, years ago for the Centre Pompidou, with Rogers as well, where I know there have been some difficulties over time about dealing with different things in that building, but I think he got it here.
Well, architects always start somewhere, and it's good that they learn from each project.
This is one of the really newer works of the exhibition that's here, and it's by Jonathan Borofsky, and I think it is a fixture in downtown Dallas. It's a favorite of so many people, and I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about it.
It's certainly hard to miss.
Yes.
At 100 feet tall, you can see it clearly over our building.
Yes.
But it seems to fit in with the skyline. This work by Jonathan Borofsky is actually recent, and it was commissioned specifically for the plaza in front of Rockefeller Center in New York City. And this is an idea that figures walking up a pole into the sky that Borofsky has dealt with in a number of different works dating from the 1980s. But this is his most ambitious attempt at this work.
Yes.
The others were single figures walking up a pole. The pole wasn't inclined so high. This has 7 figures striding up a pole that is 100 feet tall and is at about a 75-degree angle to the ground, so very steep. And then 3 figures on the ground watching them ascend. All of this goes back to, like a lot of Jonathan's work, all of it goes back to his childhood experiences. This is a particular reference to a story that his father would tell him as a boy of a benevolent giant who lived in the sky. And at the beginning of each story, at the beginning of each telling, they would imagine walking up to the sky to visit this giant and ask him what they could do to help people down on Earth. And so that kind of sense of dreams, imagination, that fanciful storytelling is inherent in this sculpture, but at the same time, this sculpture also captures that desire to better the world, the kind of human aspiration and people aspiring to strive ever higher. This sculpture has really caught the public's imagination.
Yes, definitely.
And I think has become an icon for the Nasher Sculpture Center, but also for the city of Dallas.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean,
this is a work by Raymond Duchamp-Villon, a French artist working at the beginning of the 20th century, and it's an important work because it chronicles the transition that society made from mostly agrarian society to an industrial society. And this is really at the point in which artists began to embrace these technological advancements of industry and power and steel and trains. Raymond Duchamp-Villon, who lived in France, and also the Italian futurists in Italy, really fell in love with the power of modern industry and glorified things like trains and factories, the kind of speed and power that man was able to achieve at this point. And they worked those forms into their art. In fact, you can see here, this is titled The Large Horse, but the horse, this natural form that artists have dealt with over the centuries, is becoming something much more mechanized. In place of the musculature of the horse, you have these kind of tie rods and pistons and flywheels, these more mechanical forms. The horse is transforming into an emblem of horsepower.
tell us about admission to the museum.
Sure.
And how to arrange tours.
Sure. We're open Tuesday through Sunday from 11 till 5 p.m. and we stay open late on Thursday nights till about 9 o'clock. Admission is $10 for adults, $7 for seniors, and $5 for students with an ID. And we also offer school tours, which are actually free if they are booked by the teacher. So plenty of opportunities for students to come visit the Nasher Sculpture Center, and a lot of things to see.
Now, would you give us the website and a phone number?
Of course.
Okay.
The website's www.nashersculpturecenter.org, and the phone number is 214-242-5100.
Thank you. This has been fabulous.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.